Welcome to episode 11 of Breaking the Ice. My name is Rebecca.
And I'm Connor, and we are your co-hosts.
Today on the show, we're going to learn more about the thousands of satellites that pass over the Arctic every day.
Or more specifically, how facilities in the far north help facilitate information transfers between satellites and researchers on Earth.
Satellites, as most people know, orbit around the Earth, but they don't all orbit in the same way. Many rotate in what's called a polar orbit, where the spacecraft will pass over or near both poles of the Earth, including the Arctic North Pole.
Satellites in a polar orbit are often used to observe and collect data on the Earth, and somehow that data needs to be transferred back down to the ground. Today we're speaking to a representative of the government-owned Swedish Space Corporation, or SSC, which facilitates this process in the Arctic.
In 2010, the SSC established a satellite station facility in Inuvik, Northwest Territories, as part of their Kinuvik concept. This is a partnership between Kiruna, Sweden, and Inuvik Canada to establish a wide-ranging zone of satellite connectivity coverage across the Arctic region.
Recently, the Swedish Space Corporation also announced that it would add 4 new antennas to its polar stations in Sweden and Canada. We're pleased to welcome Dan White to the show today. Dan is an engineer who now runs the Americas Business Unit at the Swedish Space Corporation.
We spoke to Dan about the SSC's work, the benefits these facilities have for local communities in the north, and cooperation between Canada and Sweden.
Now, let's get to the interview.
Okay, Dan, just to start off, can you tell us a little bit about your background and your current role at the Swedish Space Corporation?
Sure, thank you. I'm an engineer by training. I've worked in the space industry for about 35 years now, and I started at the bigger companies of Boeing and Lockheed Martin building satellites, and then also a company called Comdev that built space electronics. And then the last 5 years, I've been at Swedish Space Corporation, which actually connects with those satellites and brings the data back down to the ground and sends it off to our customers. My current role at Swedish Space Corporation is I run all of our America's business unit, which includes North America and South America, and all the customer interaction and contracting, and basically responsible for the growth of the business in that geographic area.
Thank you very much. So could you just briefly tell us and your audience about the history, a short history of satellites in the polar sphere? What are they doing there? Why is it important to have satellites and antennas in the Arctic?
Sure. And so, satellites orbit the Earth, and there's a variety of different orbits, and the polar orbit is most notable for Earth observation. And so if you think about how a satellite rotates in its orbit, the Earth is turning underneath it. And so if you're trying to capture as much Earth coverage as you can, as often as you can, the polar orbit is very advantageous. And so for many decades now, people have launched into polar orbits for Earth observation anytime they wanted to look at something, to look at changes, to monitor different things at different parts of the Earth, and then to be able to get that revisit and to make comparisons. So it's very, very important from that regard that you are able to see the Earth quite often with a lot of regularity.
And so when these satellites are in the polar orbit, what are some of the unique challenges that come along with that? I was reading something about radio frequency interference or lengthened contact times. I wonder if you could talk a little bit more about that.
Yeah, so because as the orbit goes through the poles, all of the satellites in those orbits are going through the same pole as well. And so you get a lot of congestion. And so there's quite a bit of coordination that's required for all of the satellites that are put into these polar orbits. So that's probably one of the major challenges. That in general, I would say that orbits are getting more and more crowded. There's a lot of satellites being launched. Thousands of satellites will be launched in the next 10 years, and a majority of those will be into a polar orbit for Earth observation. So we have to be worried about not only the regulatory and the frequency interference, but also just the general interference and risk of collision, and then creating more debris in space.
Turning more to sort of the more specific example of the Kinuvik concept, we know that the Inuvik satellite station was established in Canada in 2010, and the station works with a Swedish station. Can you tell us more about this partnership and what that means more generally for connectivity in the Arctic?
So Kinuvik is a combination of our Kiruna site and the Inuvik site. We have our flagship station in the north of Sweden. It's basically the same latitude as Inuvik, just above the Arctic Circle, outside of the town of Kiruna. And we've been in operation up there for over 30 years, basically providing satellite connectivity for many of our customers. Again, as the satellites are going in the polar orbits, they go across the poles on every orbit. So the further north or south you can be towards the poles, the more often you can connect with your satellite. So that's why we ended up in the north of Sweden. What we noticed is that Inuvik is essentially halfway around the world, but at the same latitude. And so as the satellite is crossing over northern Sweden, it goes through the poles and then it comes down over northern Canada into the Inuvik region. So we worked with the Canadian government to partner with the Inuvik satellite station in 2010. Like you mentioned, we have 2 antennas there now, and we are looking to expand that. But because the 2 stations are together, with antennas that we have at each site, we can provide for very long pass contacts for many of the polar orbits. So, most single sites in the north, maybe they can get 15 or 16 passes per orbit, but each pass is maybe 6 to 8 minutes long. We can capture the same number of passes, but many of the passes can be up to 20 minutes long. So you get a lot more connect time with the satellite. And generally, the goal is to get as much data down as fast as you can. So that's why we think the Kinuvik concept is very advantageous.
I know Rebecca has a few follow-up questions, but I just wanted to interject really quickly and ask. You've mentioned your customers a few times. What are the customers that you're working with? Who are these organizations?
So we have a variety of customers from governmental agencies, certainly all of the space agencies, and then recently a lot of the commercial Earth observation companies that are building small satellites and putting up constellations of their own. There's a lot of interest in monitoring the Earth, certainly from a government perspective. Canada and Sweden have shared values of looking at sustainability and monitoring climate change, and really understanding how it affects the Arctic. So the Earth observation side of, say, NASA and ESA, JAXA, CNES, DLR, those are some of our key customers operating out of the Inuvik station.
Sort of related to that, talking more about the relationship between Canada and Sweden, what makes them such great partners for projects such as this one?
I really just think it's shared values. Canada and Sweden, from a government perspective, they both have very strong values about people and kind of work-life balance. Certainly, as it relates to the climate and to the planet, it's about sustaining the planet, making sure that we leave it in a better place than we started. And so those values fit nicely with both our companies being Swedish Space Corporation and then the CCMEO, who operates the Inuvik satellite station. So I think the shared values of the countries, as well as the shared values then of the companies, really allow for a great partnership to then try to grow business together and do it in a sustainable, sort of valuable way for the planet and for the people.
What would you say would be the greatest challenge of working across 2 countries like this and coordinating an effort across the 2 governments, across the 2 areas?
It was actually remarkably easy. I mean, I would say time zone is probably the hardest part. But then, it's not easy to get to the north of Sweden, and it's not easy to get to the north of Canada. And so to get people from each place, together on the sites. I have a funny story when I was asked to go up to Inuvik for one of our management meetings, and I live in Western United States in Los Angeles. And I thought, must be very easy to get up to Inuvik, because it's sort of the western side of Canada, and it took me a day and a half. You have to stop in Edmonton and then stay all night and go up there, and so it's almost easier to get to to other places across the world. But that's probably the biggest challenge. They're very remote sites, and so to get people together and really communicating and cooperating, that's probably the challenge. We're 9 hours apart in time zone, so that's a particular challenge as well. But I would say the desire to do the right thing for the companies, for the governments, and for the planet, and for our customers. I think that certainly carried the day.
I'm wondering, when you're working this far north, one thing that Arctic 360 talks a lot about is the infrastructure gap in northern Canada, between northern Canada and southern Canada. And so when you're building these satellites and when you're building these stations, I'm wondering whether or not the infrastructure gap in working a place like northern Canada, is that a challenge for you?
Well, it just presents unique challenges, but as long as you plan for it, it seems to work out okay. We just finished the installation of a 7-meter antenna, and we did it during COVID. And we were able to sort of get people in with certain travel exceptions. We were able to use local contractors to get the infrastructure built out, and then we send folks up from our U.S. office to actually put the antenna together. So I think if you plan for it and just know that it won't be as fast as doing something in a large metropolitan area, it's certainly doable, and you just have to be aware of some of the challenges. You know, there's not as much resource available. That it might take a little bit longer. The skill, I will say that the skill sets are available. It's just if there's a lot of other infrastructure projects going on, they get tied up and they get scheduled. So you just have to plan ahead and kind of follow through on it. But we've been very happy with the support we've gotten locally up in Inuvik. We've built the 2 antennas in the last 10 years, and then we just recently put in a 7-meter, and now we're in the middle of starting another project that by the end of the year we'll put in another large aperture.
One thing that I know Connor and I, in our previous discussion with some architects up in northern Canada, a frequent issue that comes up is finding skilled laborers in these smaller communities. Just given the nature of the amount of people there, it's harder to find people specialized in these things that are often needed when you're building infrastructure in the north. Did you find that to be a large challenge? Did you feel like you had to bring in a lot of people with this skill sets to help, or were you able to find community members to assist as well?
I would say it was a shared sort of a shared challenge. We did use a lot of local contractors, and that's actually one of the things that I like about Inuvik is that they have the skills required to help us build antennas, you know, to provide the infrastructure, do the construction, help set things up. We did bring, quite a few of our own people in as well. Obviously, they're the subject matter experts for, these antenna builds. But one thing that I am also encouraging both in Kiruna and in Inuvik is because space is so exciting. I hope more and more people get excited about it and really want to take it up and kind of pick it up at a younger age, in the school, and you'll get your STEM degrees and really learn either a trade or pursue a technical field, so that it can start to build out further the skill capability within those regions in the north, because just being up in the north are going to be a little less full with the highly skilled labor that you're going to need. But we've not seen a big problem with that at all.
So I recently read that SSC has announced that it's going to be adding 4 new antennas to the polar stations in Sweden and Canada. So what will be the benefit of these additional antennas, and how will that increase connectivity for the polar orbiting satellites?
Yeah, we've just noticed that there's a lot of satellites being launched. Our current 2 antennas that are in Inuvik, and then we probably have 15 antennas in northern Sweden. They're all quite close to capacity, and so with additional satellites being launched in the next few years and in the next decade, we're really planning for the growth. We know that there's going to be a lot of data generated in space. Being these are polar stations, there's going to be a lot of contact time with those satellites as they orbit the poles. So we felt it was prudent to put 1 antenna in northern Sweden, and then we're going to add 3 antennas in Inuvik. Like I said, 1 antenna is actually it probably is operational now. We have a second one that'll be online by the fall, and then just starting construction on a 3rd antenna in Inuvik. So hopefully, cross our fingers, it'll be done by the end of the year.
How do these antennas, I've read a lot that these antennas support sort of environmental observation data. I also read a little bit about sort of providing security information in the northern latitudes, since there is not a lot of people there to observe this. Can you tell us a little bit more about how it can sort of provide these different forms of data?
Yeah, it's again, since it's going around in the polar orbit, it's constantly sort of looking at the Earth. And so if you're looking for changes or any kind of monitoring information, so from an Earth observation point of view, governments, companies, people, they want to take pictures of, they look at Arctic ice melt and they look at CO2 monitoring, they look at wave height, sea level, um, Arctic ice temperature, or not Arctic, Arctic ice expansion and contraction over time. And so from an Earth observation point of view, the polar satellites and any of the stations in the north is absolutely, it's just perfect, because you get as much contact time as you can, and then using the Kinuvik option, you get as much data downloaded as you can possibly get. Alternatively, on a security front, you can monitor things. We all like our neighbors, but sometimes the neighbors do things that they're not supposed to be doing. And so from space you can monitor if people are building something that they might not supposed to be building in the Arctic, or if they're doing some digging or dredging that they shouldn't be doing, or if on the military side they're actually moving troops or moving hardware around. You can monitor that just to either verify that something isn't happening, or just keep track of what is happening. So Earth observation and security, basically the ability to see the Earth as often as you possibly can and get that data down as quickly as you can. That fits very, very well with what we're doing in the north, both in Sweden and in Inuvik.
So I'm wondering if you could just explain to me a little bit more about the technical side of this. So is it that the satellites connect with your antennas and then the information is essentially downloaded from space to the Earth? And then is it you who handles the data, or is it you just facilitate the transfer for these organizations?
We're a conduit of the data to our customers. And so our job is to connect with the satellite and get the data from the satellite to the ground to the customer. So we typically do not do anything with the data. We are just basically a pipe to get it to either their operations center, their mission operations control center, wherever they're going to be utilizing the data.
And so can you tell us a little bit about some of the efforts you're doing to improve the transfer of data or the security of it? What are some of the new and innovative techniques that you're working on at SSC?
Well, we are constantly looking at security. There's so much discussion these days about hacking and getting in, and people stealing data. Most of the data that comes across our network is sort of already encrypted before we get it. So even if somebody did sort of hack in and get the data, it would probably not be too usable to them. But we're constantly looking at our firewalls, and then our techniques of mitigation to keep people from coming in, and then all of the cyber security aspects of that. So there's a lot of work going on the network side for that. On the antenna side, we really just need to have sort of robust antennas, so that when a customer wants to make contact with their satellite, they can make contact with their satellite. And so we like to be available anytime, anywhere. So no matter what orbit your satellite is in, whenever you want to talk to it, we're ready with our Kinuvik antennas. So it's really about just maintaining proficiency, having sort of the best equipment that we can, and then going through proper cybersecurity techniques to make sure that data is secure in its transfer back to the customer site.
Can you talk a little bit about the local communities in Inuvik and Kiruna? So could you talk a little bit about building the community, your relationship with the community there?
Yeah, like I said, we've been in Kiruna. That's probably where we have built the community, the most. We've been there for over 30 years. We have, there's probably 500 people employed by the space sector in the north of Sweden. SSC employs about 200 of those people at our site that I talked about up in the north. And then while on the Inuvik side, we don't have any direct employees, we do believe that we need to use local contractors. And so as we do expansion and as we do additional maintenance and other operations, we really look to the local area for those skills and for those resources and those contractors. So we want to do whatever we can to ensure that the economic development continues in both of those areas. And so we try to do that by maintaining the expansion, maintaining the operation, and trying to continue to grow that business not only for our customers, but then if we can grow it for our customers, that should bring back more work, either in the establishment phase or in the operations phase, where the local community could help us out.
Do you have any plans to hire employees in Inuvik? Because you said you had 200 in Sweden.
Yeah, we're talking about, especially with the new antennas that we're putting in, we're talking about possibly having some dedicated resource in Canada at the ISSF. They would help us with maintenance and operation of the antennas. We work closely with CCMEO, who has some operation and maintenance folks there as well. They're local Inuvik residents. So we do have some long-term plans for that, but nothing in the next few months.
Besides hiring local labor, would you say that there's any major benefits for communities like Inuvik who host these satellite stations? What would you highlight for that?
Having the ISSF in Inuvik, one, it's a high-tech industry. It's a high-tech business, and so I view space as exciting. And I'm a bit biased. I've been involved for 35 years, but probably because it is so exciting is why I've been involved for 35 years. And I would hope that the community, the people that live there, the residents, the children, the school kids, that they get as excited about it as we are about it, and then sort of take that in and really want to learn more about the technical side of things, and so that they could then contribute to the space industry as the space industry continues to grow in that area. I think the other sort of tangential benefit is the ISSF needed better connectivity. And so that, with some other reasons, led to the McKenzie Valley fiber line being put in. And so now, while it provides extra bandwidth for the ISSF to get its data back to the customers much faster with much higher bandwidth, it also provides high bandwidth to the region. And so that benefits not only businesses, but that's going to benefit residents as well. So I think having a space project, a space company in Inuvik is really good for the community. It should encourage and instill excitement in the kids and in the community. It then leads to other technology advances like the the McKenzie Valley fiber. And then the same thing exactly happens in Kiruna. It's just been going on for much longer. Like I said, over 30 years, and they've got lots of they have space. The Space Physics Institute is up there. They have STAC, which is a subsidiary of an ESA, or part of ESA. So there's quite a few space companies already in Kiruna that, again, they've just been doing this for a long time, and they develop more and more, kind of local skills, just because it is so interesting.
Yeah, I'm glad you highlighted that connectivity aspect, especially the benefits to the local community. I think the fiber optic cable is huge, because that's one thing we talk about at Arctic 360 a lot. There's this huge internet gap between what's available in Northern Canada and what's available in Southern Canada. So anything that can improve that is a foundation worth building upon, I guess.
And then I hope that we on the business side can continue to use it and continue to pay for it and continue to keep it operational. And then the benefit of that will benefit the residents. You don't want residents to kind of pick up the full burden for the cost of that. So I think the businesses are using it quite a lot, and then the residents should get the benefit of that.
Jumping on to sort of a next area, do you think that the Kinuvik concept will continue to grow? I know our past conversation over this past half an hour, we've been talking about the additional antennas. Do you see it as sort of being a continually growing project over the next coming years and continuing?
Yeah, I think if you look at the number of satellites expected to be launched in the next 10 years, other than the ones for Starlink and OneWeb and Amazon Kuiper, you kind of take those out. There's hundreds of satellites per year being launched for Earth observation, and 90% of those satellites will go into a polar orbit. So it's absolutely critical that you get more downlink capacity in the Arctic areas, just so you can get the data down as quickly as you need to get it down, and get it actioned, by whomever needs to take action on it. So we're extremely bullish on the Kinuvik concept, and that's why we kind of lean forward and put these 4 antennas in, 1 in Sweden and 3 in Canada. And I would expect in the next 5 years, we're going to be building out more than that. There's just so many satellites and so much data. It's really hard to get it down with the capacity that exists today. Regardless if it's just SSC, all of the antennas in the north, there's just not enough antennas to get all the data down. So it will absolutely continue.
Yeah. Do you think that the growth will mostly be at the 2 sort of sites that are established now, or do you see more sites sort of springing up in the Arctic to increase sort of?
There could be a little of both. I mean, I would like to think that we'll use the sites that we've spent so much time establishing and just expand those. I do know that at the ISSF, there's a phase 3 expansion plot. I toured that a couple of years ago when I was up there, and it's got quite a few acres available for expansion. So I would expect as our expansion continues, we'll move into phase 3 for our next move.
So I hope I'm not putting you too much on the spot with this question, but if you had to boil the SSC and down to the single most innovative aspect of this project, what would you say for it?
I guess by reaching out and being the global company that we are, we were able to piece together 2 sites that can provide the longest amount of contact time for polar satellites of any company in the world. And we did that by really looking outside of our region. If you looked only in Sweden, then you could only put antennas in the north of Sweden. But we really reached out globally and looked at who else is doing the same thing that we're doing, and how do we partner with those people. And that led us to Canada. The Swedish government values are very similar to the Canadian government values, and so that was just a match made in heaven. And then the business kind of drove it. We needed lots of connect time. So I really just think it's our ability to think globally and solve problems, without barriers.
Well, great. My last question was going to be whether or not you have anything to add before you finish, but I feel like you wrapped that up pretty well right there.
I think, I'll just say one thing more on a personal note. I really love this project. I mean, I love the North and I love space. And so this project ties both of those things together. And, somebody might say, well, he said he lives in Los Angeles, so why does he love the North? And that's exactly why I love the North, because I think I take for granted our nice weather, and I really love the change of seasons. And so when, I have very fond memories. I've been to the north of Sweden, 5 or 6 times. I've been to northern Canada, 4 or 5 times. And every time I go, it is beautiful. The people are so nice. I love the variety of culture. I love the heritage, and the fact that we can give back by putting a space project in both of those areas, I think is very, very important to me, and I think it's very, very important to those communities as well. And so we want to try to continue to give back, not only in the business side but also in the cultural side.
Thank you so much, Dan. That's a great way to sort of wrap it up. I know I always appreciate when people add a little bit of a personal touch to their perspective and why they're so interested in the Arctic. I really appreciate that.
Great. Well, thank you. Thank you very much. Thanks, Rebecca. Thank you, Connor.
Thank you very much.